Have you ever been the person everyone runs to when life falls apart? But when your own world starts breaking, nobody even notices? Because that was me. My name is Claire, and for most of my life, I thought being the good one was the same as being loved. I thought if I kept showing up, if I kept giving, if I kept saying yes, if I kept putting other people first, then one day somebody would do the same for me. I was wrong. And the day I learned that truth, it hurt so badly that I can still feel it when I think about it. But it also changed my life forever. So stay with me, because this is the story of how I gave everything I had to everyone else, and how, when I finally had nothing left, one act of kindness opened my eyes and made me rebuild my life from the ground up. I used to be the girl everyone called reliable, not smart, not beautiful, not interesting, just reliable. That word followed me everywhere. At work, if someone needed help finishing a report, they came to me. If a friend needed money before payday, they came to me. If someone was lonely on a Friday night, they called me. If a family member needed a ride, a favor, a place to stay, a shoulder to cry on, or someone to listen without judgment, they came to me. And me? I never said no. I told myself that was a good thing. I told myself that kind people are the glue holding everything together. I told myself that love looks like sacrifice. So I kept giving. I gave my time when I was tired. I gave my money when I was struggling. I gave my energy when I had nothing left. I gave my heart to people who never even asked if mine was okay. Some nights I would sit in my car outside my apartment, hands on the steering wheel, too exhausted to move, and still answer calls from people who needed just 5 minutes of my time. But 5 minutes was never 5 minutes. It was usually an hour, and an hour became a whole evening. And a whole evening became another day I forgot to care for myself. Still, I kept doing it, because every time someone said, "Claire, I don't know what I'd do without you," it made me feel useful. And when you feel invisible for long enough, being useful starts to feel like being loved. That was my mistake. I was not loved. I was convenient. I didn't see that clearly at first, because I was too busy helping everyone else survive their storms. I was the friend who drove across town at midnight when someone's car broke down. I was the daughter who paid part of my mom's bills when her hours got cut at work. I was the sister who covered for everybody, made excuses for everybody, forgave everybody. I was the coworker who stayed late so someone else could go home early. I was the one who gave birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, gas money, lunch money, emotional support, encouragement, and endless patience. And if I'm being honest, I liked being needed. It made me feel important. It made me feel like my existence mattered. But that kind of life comes with a quiet kind of pain. Because when you are always the strong one, people forget that you are human. They forget you get tired. They forget you cry. They forget you need help too. And eventually, they forget to ask. For years, I swallowed that hurt. I smiled through it. I convinced myself that no one owed me anything. That's what good people do, right? They give without expecting returns. That's what I believed. Until one winter changed everything. It started with my job. I worked at a small marketing company in downtown Chicago. Nothing glamorous. Just long days, too much coffee, and enough deadlines to make anybody question their life choices. One Thursday afternoon, my manager called me into the office. He looked uncomfortable, which should have warned me. "Claire," he said, folding his hands on the desk, "I've got bad news. We're cutting your position." I stared at him. I remember blinking like my brain needed a second to translate the words. Cutting my position, not reducing hours, not relocating me, not moving me somewhere else, cutting me. Just like that. He kept talking. Severance package, company restructuring, budget changes, all those cold corporate words that sound polite while they take your stability away. I heard him, But I wasn't really listening, because one thought kept beating in my chest like a fist. How am I going to pay rent? I walked out of that office with a cardboard box and a smile so fake it almost cracked my face. I didn't tell anyone for 2 days. Not my sister. Not my friends. Not my mom. I was embarrassed. I had spent years helping other people stay afloat, and now I couldn't even keep my own life above water. I spent the whole first night at home staring at the ceiling, pretending I was okay. The next morning, I opened my laptop and started applying for jobs like my life depended on it, because it did. But bills don't wait for hope. My rent was due, my phone bill was due, my car insurance was due, my savings almost gone. I had one small emergency fund, and I had promised myself I would never touch it unless I absolutely had to. That same week, my younger brother called. "Claire," he said, sounding stressed, "I hate to ask this, but can you help me? I'm short on rent, and if I miss this payment, I'm done." I closed my eyes. My brother and I had helped each other before, but this time I was the one drowning. "How much?" I asked. He named the amount. It was almost everything I had left. I should have said no. I should have said, "I'm sorry. I can't." I should have told him I was unemployed and terrified and barely holding myself together. Instead, I heard myself say, "Yeah, I'll send it." And just like that, the little money I had left disappeared from my account. The second I hit send, I felt sick. Not because I had helped him, but because I knew I had just chosen him over myself again. Still, I told myself it was fine. That's what family does. That's what love does. That's what I kept repeating. But then my own rent notice showed up 3 days later. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't have enough. I sat at my kitchen table with the envelope in my hand, staring at the number on the page, and I felt my chest tighten. I called my sister Tanya. She answered on the 4th ring. "Hey sis," she said. "What's up?" I swallowed hard. "Can I borrow some money? Just until I get a new job." There was a pause. Then she said, "Oh, Claire, I'm sorry. I can't right now. We're really tight." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Okay," I whispered. She rushed into her next sentence like she needed to move on quickly. "But hey, I'm sure you'll figure something out. You always do." Always do. That phrase stayed in the air after the call ended. You always do. Because apparently, my pain was not an emergency. My struggle was just something I handled. Something I fixed. Something I carried quietly so nobody else had to. I called 2 friends after that. One didn't answer. The other said she would check her budget and never called back. I told myself not to take it personally, but it was personal. Everything about it was personal. When they needed me, I was there in minutes. When I needed them, they had calendars, excuses, and silence. That night, I sat on my couch in an old sweatshirt, knees pulled up to my chest, trying to figure out how I had become the person everyone leaned on but no one leaned toward. I kept thinking about every birthday I remembered, every broken heart I listened to, every emergency I solved, every late night ride I gave, every bill I covered, every emotional collapse I helped carry. And now, when I needed help with something as basic as rent, the answer was no, or worse than no. It was, "You'll figure it out." I cried harder than I expected to, not because I was broke, not because I was scared, but because I finally saw the shape of my own life. I had been so busy being generous that I had become invisible. The next week was the hardest. I started selling things online. A lamb, a jacket I loved, a pair of shoes I had barely worn, my old headphones, a little silver necklace my aunt gave me years ago. It didn't solve much, but it helped me breathe. I picked up a temporary part-time job at a bookstore nearby. It wasn't much money, but it was something. At night, after work, I would go home exhausted and apply for jobs until my eyes burned. And still, In the middle of all that chaos, people kept asking me for things. Claire, can you help me move this weekend? Claire, can you loan me a little money? Claire, can you watch the kids for a few hours? Claire, can you proofread this for me? Claire, can you come talk to my mom? She likes you. Every time my phone lit up, I felt a wave of dread, because now every request felt like a test, and every yes felt like a betrayal of myself. But saying no didn't come naturally. I had trained myself to be available. I had built an identity around being easy to count on. And when you build your worth around that, boundaries feel selfish. So I kept saying yes, even when I was burning out, until one night, something happened that I never saw coming. It was raining hard. One of those cold, ugly city rains that gets into your coat and makes everything feel heavier. I had just closed the bookstore and was walking to the bus stop when I realized my bus card was missing. I checked my pockets 3 times, then my bag, then the front counter at work. Nothing. I felt panic rush through me. I was already tired, already cold, already carrying too much in my head, and now I had no way to get home. I stood under a streetlight, watching the rain hit the sidewalk, trying not to cry. That's when I noticed an older woman standing near me, holding a grocery bag in one hand and looking just as soaked as I felt. She was maybe in her 70s, small and fragile looking, with a kind face and tired eyes. She looked at me and said, "Honey, are you all right?" And something about the way she said it made me almost lose it right there. I almost laughed, because I was so used to being the person asking everyone else that nobody had asked me that in a long time. "I'm fine," I said automatically. She gave me a gentle look that said she didn't believe me. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a few wrinkled bills. "Take this," she said. I blinked. "Oh no, I can't." "Yes, you can," she said quietly. "You need it more than I do." I stared at the money in her hand. It wasn't much. Maybe enough for the bus. Maybe enough for a sandwich. Maybe enough for something small. But to me in that moment, it felt enormous. Because it wasn't the money. It was the fact that she saw me. She saw that I was struggling. She didn't ask me to perform strength. She didn't tell me I would figure it out. She didn't make me earn kindness. She just gave it. I took the money with shaking hands. "Thank you," I whispered. She nodded and smiled a little. "Don't thank me. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself." That sentence hit me so hard I had to look away. Take care of yourself. Not everybody else. Not the loudest person in the room. Not the neediest person in the room. Yourself. I got on the bus and cried the whole way home. Not the ugly, messy kind of crying where you're falling apart. The quiet kind. The kind where something inside you finally cracks open. That woman didn't know me. She didn't owe me anything. And still, she gave me more care in 30 seconds than some people had given me in years. When I got home, I sat on my bed and thought about her words over and over again. And for the first time, I had a thought that felt dangerous. Maybe I'd been giving too much to people who never intended to give anything back. Maybe being kind didn't mean being endless. Maybe love without boundaries was just self-destruction with a prettier name. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept replaying every relationship in my life. Every time I had dropped my own plans to rescue someone else. Every time I had gone broke helping another person spend money they didn't have. Every time I had swallowed hurt because I didn't want to seem difficult. And slowly, painfully, I started admitting the truth. Some people didn't love me. They loved access to me. The next morning, I made a decision. A small one at first. I was going to stop letting my life be an open door for everybody. It sounds simple. It wasn't. The first time I said no to a friend, my hands shook. She texted me asking if I could loan her money again. I stared at the message for a long time. My heart was racing. I wanted to explain. I wanted her to understand. I wanted to soften it so she would still like me. But then I remembered something. Every time I had said yes in the past, I had done it hoping they would love me more. And every time, I had been disappointed. So I typed, "I'm sorry, I can't help with money right now." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then came back, then finally, wow. Okay, didn't think you'd be like that. I felt the sting immediately, because there it was. Not concern, not understanding, not, "Are you okay?" Just disappointment that the helpful version of me had closed her hand. I put my phone down and cried for 10 minutes. Then I wiped my face, stood up, and kept going. That was the beginning of my change. Not dramatic, not loud, just honest. I started making a list of my actual responsibilities, not the fake ones people had laid on me, the real ones. Rent, food, transportation, health, rest, a future. I made a budget. I canceled subscriptions I never used. I stopped buying things for other people when I couldn't afford my own basics. I learned to pause before answering calls and texts. I didn't answer every request immediately. Sometimes I said, "I'm not available." Sometimes I said, "No, I can't." Sometimes I didn't explain at all. And every single time it felt like I was doing something illegal. That's how deep the guilt had gone. But with each boundary, something surprising happened. I felt stronger. Not meaner. Not colder. Stronger. Because I was no longer handing away pieces of myself to prove I mattered. I started remembering what I liked. I started cooking for myself again, instead of ordering takeout because I was too busy rescuing everyone else. I started taking walks after work just to clear my head. I started reading again. I started sleeping with my phone on silent. I started asking myself a question I had never asked before. What do I need? At first, I didn't even know how to answer. I had spent so long focusing on other people's emergencies that I had become a stranger to my own needs. But slowly, I began to understand. I needed peace. I needed stability. I needed people who did not only call me when they were falling apart. I needed rest. I needed self-respect. And honestly, I needed to forgive myself for letting things go on too long. Because that was another lesson I had to learn. I was angry at the people who used me, but I was also angry at myself for allowing it. And while that anger was valid, it was also keeping me stuck. So one night, sitting alone in my apartment with a cup of tea that had gone cold, I said it out loud. I did my best with what I knew. That sentence changed everything, because it was true. I had not been foolish. I had been loving. I had not been weak. I had been loyal. I had not been stupid. I had been hoping. And there is nothing wrong with hope. The problem was not my kindness. The problem was that I had given it away without protection. So I made a vow to myself. I would still be kind, but I would not be empty. I would still help, but I would not destroy myself to do it. I would still love people, but I would not beg to be valued. About 2 months later, something else happened. I got a job offer. It wasn't my dream role, but it was better pay, better hours, and more room to grow. The day I signed the paperwork, I sat in my car and smiled for the first time in weeks. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. But because I could feel my life becoming mine again. I called my mom to tell her the news. She sounded relieved. Proud, even. "I knew you'd land on your feet," she said. I smiled, but this time I didn't let the words hurt me. Because I finally understood something. Landing on my feet did not mean everybody else got to keep dropping me and expecting me to catch them. I didn't tell many people about my new boundaries. I didn't make a big speech. I didn't post a long message online. I just changed. And when the old patterns came back, I responded differently. If someone asked for money, I said no. If someone wanted my time, I checked whether I had the space. If someone tried to guilt me, I didn't rush to fix their feelings. And something interesting happened. The people who truly cared adjusted. They respected me more. They checked on me more often. They didn't just ask what I could give. They asked how I was doing. The people who only liked the old version of me, the version who never said no, slowly disappeared. At first, that hurt. I won't lie about that. Losing people, even unhealthy ones, still feels like grief. But then I realized something important. I was not losing friends. I was losing obligations, disguised as relationships. That made it easier to breathe. One evening, months after that rainy night, I was walking home from work when my phone buzzed again. It was Tanya, my sister. She hadn't called much lately. There had been some tension between us after I stopped being everyone's emergency wallet and emotional support system. But that night, her message was different. It said, "Can you talk?" I called her back. Her voice was softer than usual. She told me she had been overwhelmed. She said she was dealing with her own pressure. She said she had noticed me pulling back, and at first she felt hurt. But then she started thinking about how often I had been there for everyone and how little anyone had asked about me. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I think I got used to you being the strong one," she said. "I forgot you were carrying stuff too." I sat very still, because that was the first time anyone in my life had said that out loud. She apologized. Not perfectly, not dramatically, but honestly, and I accepted it. Not because everything had been fixed, but because I could hear the difference between guilt and growth. We talked for a long time that night. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the family fixer. I felt like a person, and that mattered more than anything. So what did I learn through all of this? I learned that kindness is beautiful, but kindness without boundaries can become self-abandonment. I learned that some people will only value what you do for them, not who you are. I learned that being good should never mean being available for abuse. I learned that helping others is noble, but helping yourself is not selfish. I learned that if your whole identity is built around rescuing people, you may forget to rescue your own life. And I learned that the moment you stop begging to be used, you begin to discover who truly belongs around you. That older woman in the rain changed my life with a few damp bills and one simple sentence. "Please take care of yourself." She will never know how much that meant. She gave me something I had spent years giving away to others. Care without conditions. And that was the mirror I needed. Because after that, I could no longer pretend that sacrificing myself was the same as being a good person. It was not. A good life is not built on being endlessly available to people who would never do the same for you. A good life is built on honesty, on balance, on respect, on learning that you matter even when you are not useful. Today, I still help people. But now I ask myself hard questions before I say yes. Can I actually afford this? Do I have the energy? Will this help? Or will this hurt me? Is this love? Or is this me trying to earn approval? Those questions saved me. And they taught me something deeper than boundaries. They taught me self-worth. So if you are listening to me right now and you feel like your life has become one long emergency for everybody else, I want to say this gently. You do not have to keep proving that you have a good heart. The right people will already see it. You do not have to bleed for everyone to deserve love. You do not have to disappear to be valued. And you are allowed to stop giving your last piece away just because someone asks. Your life belongs to you too. I learned that the hard way. I lost money. I lost time. I lost peace. I lost people who only wanted the old version of me. But I found something bigger. I found myself, and once that happened, everything changed. Not overnight, Not magically, but steadily, quietly, powerfully. I rebuilt my life one boundary at a time. I learned to say no without apologizing for my existence. I learned to rest without guilt. I learned that being kind and being strong are not opposites. And I learned that the strongest thing I ever did was stop abandoning myself for people who never planned to stay. That was when my real life began. Not the life where I was everyone's emergency contact. Not the life where I said yes before thinking. Not the life where I carried everyone else and called it love. My real life began the moment I understood that peace is not built by being needed all the time. Peace is built by being respected. And respect starts with the way you treat yourself. But even after I started changing, there were still moments when the old version of me tried to come back. Because healing is not one clean line. It is not one powerful speech and suddenly you are whole. It is 100 small choices. 100 moments where you do the harder thing, the healthier thing, the quieter thing. And for me, one of those moments came in the most unexpected way. A few weeks after I started my new job, my phone rang during lunch. It was my cousin, Amanda. We were never especially close, but she had always known how to find me when she needed something. "Claire!" she said, sounding rushed. "I need a huge favor." I stared at the sandwich in my hand and felt my stomach tighten immediately. There it was again. That familiar feeling, the old instinct to drop everything. "What happened?" I asked carefully. She launched into a long story about how her boyfriend had left, how she needed help with moving, how she was emotionally falling apart, and how she didn't know who else to call. While she talked, I sat there in the break room watching other people laugh softly around me, and I realized something with painful clarity. I was tired of being the place people dump their chaos. Not because I had no compassion, but because compassion without limits had nearly destroyed me. So I took a breath, and I said, "Amanda, I'm sorry you're hurting. I really am. But I can't drop everything to fix this." There was silence, a heavy one. Then she said, almost offended, "Wow, I didn't expect that from you." I shut my eyes for a second, because I knew exactly what she meant. She meant she expected me to keep being the version of me that never protected herself. The one who always made life easier for everyone else. The one who never made anybody uncomfortable with a no. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about disappointing her. I just felt clear. "I know," I said softly, "but I'm trying to live differently now." She didn't answer right away. Then she muttered something cold and ended the call. I put the phone down and sat there in silence. Part of me felt shaky. Part of me wanted to text her back and explain. Part of me wanted to soften the edges and make her understand that I still cared. But I didn't. Because I knew now that if I kept over-explaining myself, I would end up back in the same prison. A prison built out of politeness. Built out of guilt. Built out of other people's expectations. I finished my lunch and went back to work. And I remember thinking, this is what growth feels like. Not loud. Not glamorous. Just honest. Just painful enough to be real. A few days later, I got a message from my old friend Brooke. Brooke had once been the kind of friend I thought I would know forever. We used to talk about everything. Dreams, heartbreak, family, the future. But over time, something changed. She started calling only when she needed advice, money, or emotional rescue. She never asked how I was. She never noticed when I was slipping. She just kept reaching, and I kept giving, until I had nothing left. Her text said, "Hey, I know things have been weird. I miss you. Can we talk?" I stared at that message for a long time. A year ago, I would have answered instantly. I would have apologized for things I had not done. I would have made myself available at the expense of my own peace. But now I was learning to pause. So I did. I waited. Then I asked myself one question. Am I missing her, or am I missing the version of me who tolerated too much? That question changed everything. Because the truth was, I missed the memory of the friendship, not the reality of it. The reality was that I had become a service, not a person. So I replied, I'm open to talking, but I need honest friendship now, not just contact when something is wrong. She didn't respond for 2 days. When she finally did, it was short. I didn't realize you felt that way. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was exactly the problem. She hadn't realized because she had never truly looked. And that was when I understood something else. Sometimes people don't miss you. They miss what you did for them. That is not the same thing. Not even close. Months passed. My new job got better. I started learning the rhythm of a life that didn't revolve around other people's chaos. I paid my bills on time. I saved a little money. I even opened a separate savings account just for myself. It may sound small, but that account meant freedom to me. It meant I was finally building a life that could hold me. I also started doing something I had not done in years. I started saying yes to myself. I bought groceries I actually liked instead of the cheapest possible food. I bought a secondhand chair for my apartment so I could sit somewhere comfortable in the evenings. I lit a candle at night and listened to soft music while I cooked dinner. I took myself on long walks by the lake. I went to a bookstore alone and spent an hour reading without checking my phone. I began to enjoy my own company. That may sound simple, but for someone who had spent years living like a rescue team, it was revolutionary. I was no longer waiting for life to make room for me. I was making room for myself. And the more I did that, the more I noticed the difference in the people around me. Some people started treating me like I had changed for the worse. They said I was distant. They said I was harder to reach. They said I was different. And they were right. I was different. I was no longer easy to use. I was no longer available on demand. I was no longer the girl who would sacrifice her peace just to keep everybody else comfortable. That version of me was gone, and I had to mourn her a little, because she had been sincere. She had been loving. She had been trying so hard to earn a place in the world. But she had also been hurting, and I could not keep dragging her forward. I had to let her rest. One night after work, I received a call from my mother. She sounded uneasy. Your aunt told me you've been saying no to people a lot lately, she said carefully. I sat down on the edge of my bed. Here we go, I thought. The family version of the interrogation. But my mom was quieter than usual. She said, you're not helping as much as before. I took a breath. I'm not helping as much as before because I was helping too much before. My mother didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, you know people are going to say you've changed. Yes, I replied. And that's okay. That answer surprised even me. For years, I would have rushed to defend myself, to explain, to reassure everyone that I was still the same Claire they could count on. But I wasn't the same. And that did not make me cruel. It made me honest. My mom was quiet again. Then she said something I never expected. I think I let you carry too much. That hit me harder than I was ready for. Because mothers are not supposed to say things like that unless they mean them. And she did. Her voice cracked a little when she continued. I thought you were just strong. I didn't realize strength can turn into silence. I had to look away from the phone. My throat tightened. Because for years I had wanted someone in my family to see that. Not to praise me for handling everything. Not to rely on me harder. Just to see the weight of it. And in that moment, my mother did. It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't a dramatic emotional scene. It was just real. And sometimes real is the most healing thing in the world. After that call, I sat in the dark for a while. No music, no TV, just silence. And in that silence, I thought about the older woman in the rain. I thought about the money in her hand. I thought about the way her kindness had interrupted my self-destruction. Then I thought about all the times I had helped people who never once checked whether I had enough left to survive. That difference mattered. A lot. Because giving from fullness is love. Giving from emptiness is self-erasure. I had done the second for years. No more. So I made a promise to myself that night. From now on, I would not confuse sacrifice with morality. I would not call exhaustion generosity. I would not call neglect loyalty. I would not call over-functioning love. And I would not let anybody guilt me into becoming small again. But growth always gets tested. Always. And mine came in the form of an old neighbor, Mrs. Ellison. She was an elderly woman who lived 2 doors down from me when I first moved into my apartment. Sweet, quiet, lonely. I had helped her plenty of times over the years, carrying groceries, picking up prescriptions, fixing her Wi-Fi, driving her to appointments. I never minded helping her because she was different. She never demanded. She always thanked me. She always asked how I was doing. She always remembered my birthday. She always left me homemade cookies at Christmas. She was one of the few people in my life who had poured back in. So when she called one afternoon and said she needed help opening a stubborn jar and setting up a new phone, I smiled and went over without hesitation. It was raining again, strangely enough. Maybe rain had become a symbol for the old and the new in my life. When I got there, she was sitting at the kitchen table with a worried expression. But when she saw me, she smiled. "There you are," she said. "I knew you'd come." I laughed. Of course I did. She studied my face a moment and then asked, "Are you all right, dear?" That question, so simple, so human. I was used to people asking it only when they needed something, but she asked because she meant it. "I'm better," I told her. She nodded like she understood something deeper than my words. Then she said, "Good, because people like you often forget that helping others is a gift, not a sentence." I froze. "People like me?" She gave me a soft smile. "The ones who keep giving long after they're empty." That sentence stayed with me for days. Gift, not sentence. That's what kindness should be. Something offered freely, not something forced out of you until you break. I helped her with the jar and the phone, and before I left, she put a small container of soup into my hands. "You take care of yourself now," she said, just like the woman in the rain. And I laughed a little through my emotions because it felt like the universe was repeating itself just to make sure I got the lesson. I hugged her before leaving, and when I walked back home with that warm soup in my hands, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Safe. Not because life was perfect, but because I was learning how to protect myself inside it. A year passed. That's the part people never tell you. Change is not just a decision. It is time. It is repetition. It is rebuilding your identity slowly enough that it starts to feel natural. 1 year after losing my job, I was still Claire. But I was not the same Claire. I had more confidence now, but not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that does not need permission to exist. The kind that can say no without trembling. The kind that can leave a phone unanswered without feeling like a bad person. The kind that can watch someone else be disappointed and not collapse under it. I had learned to protect my peace like it was something sacred. Because it was. And one evening, while sitting in my apartment with the city lights glowing through the window, I realized something I wish I had known much earlier. People will always have needs. That is life. But not every need is yours to carry. Not every problem is your responsibility. Not every person who reaches for you is meant to stay close to you. And not every act of kindness deserves your whole life in return. That realization did not make me cold. It made me free. I stopped living as if my worth depended on how many fires I could put out. I stopped chasing approval from people who only noticed me when they were falling apart. There was one more thing I had to face before I could truly say I had changed. And honestly, it was the hardest thing of all. It was not the people who left. It was not the money. It was not the loneliness. It was the deep, painful truth that I had allowed my own heart to become a place where everyone else could live comfortably, while I stood outside in the cold. That truth hurt more than any bad memory, because once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. I started noticing all the places where I had abandoned myself. The times I stayed silent when I wanted to speak. The times I gave money I could not afford to give. The times I smiled while I was hurting just to keep the peace. The times I said, "It's okay," when it was not okay at all. The times I ignored my own exhaustion because somebody else seemed to need me more. I used to think that made me a good person. Now I knew it also made me easy to drain. That difference mattered. A lot. And because I finally understood it, I made one more promise to myself. I was going to rebuild not just my habits, but my standards. Because healing is not only about what you stop doing, it is also about what you refuse to accept anymore. So I started with the people around me. Not in a dramatic way, not with angry speeches, just quietly, carefully, honestly, one by one. I began to separate the real relationships from the ones built on need. I stopped replying instantly to people who only reached out when they wanted something. I stopped apologizing for my absence when I had been busy protecting my peace. I stopped over-explaining my boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding them. And something beautiful happened. The more honest I became, the more peaceful my life felt. At first, some people got offended. Then some got distant. Then some vanished completely. And for a while that hurt. It hurt because every goodbye still feels like a bruise, even when it is necessary. But the silence they left behind was revealing. Because in that silence, I could finally hear myself think. And in that quiet, I realized I had spent years living in noise. Other people's crises, other people's emotions, other people's expectations, other people's emergencies. Now, for the first time in a long time, I had space. Space to breathe. Space to think. Space to feel. Space to ask, what do I actually want? That question changed my life too. Because I had spent so long serving everyone else that I had forgotten I was allowed to have desires of my own. So, I started small. I redecorated my apartment. Nothing expensive, just little things that made it feel like mine. A new lamp, fresh curtains, a warm blanket, a small plant by the window, a framed photo of me and my mother from years ago, both of us smiling in the sun. I began to love my space the way I had once loved everyone else. I cooked for myself with care. I bought ingredients I actually wanted instead of whatever was cheapest and easiest. I listened to music while cleaning. I opened the windows in the mornings. I let sunlight into rooms that had felt heavy for too long. It may sound simple, but these little things mattered. Because every small act of care was a message. To my heart, to my mind, to my soul. You live here too. You count too. Then one evening, something happened that made me realize how far I had come. I was leaving work when I saw a young woman sitting on a bench outside the building. She looked exhausted, not just tired, the kind of tired that sits in a person's bones. She was holding a phone in one hand and crying quietly into the other. I stopped for a second, then kept walking. I did, and that surprised me, because the old Claire would have rushed straight over. She would have asked what happened. She would have tried to fix everything before she even knew what was wrong. But this time I paused. I watched her, and then I asked myself a question I had learned to ask now. Is this my burden, Or is this my compassion speaking? I did not know the answer right away, so I walked a little farther. Then I stopped again, because while I had learned how to protect myself, I never wanted to lose the part of me that cared. I turned around and went back, not to rescue her, not to make her dependent on me, just to be human. I sat beside her on the bench and said softly, "Are you okay?" She looked up at me with red eyes and shook her head. And the thing she said next broke my heart. "I don't know how to ask for help anymore without feeling like a burden." I went very still, because those words belonged to a version of me I knew too well. For a second, I couldn't even speak. Then I said, "You're not a burden." Her face crumpled a little more, and suddenly the whole moment became about something deeper than her sadness. It was about all the years I had spent teaching myself to earn kindness. All the years I had treated my own need for care like something shameful. I took a breath and said, "You don't have to fall apart perfectly to deserve support." She looked at me like nobody had ever said that to her before. Maybe nobody had. I stayed with her for 20 minutes while she told me about a breakup, a lost job, and a family that was too busy to notice how badly she was hurting. I listened. I did not interrupt. I did not jump in with answers. I did not try to make her pain smaller. And when she was done, she whispered, "Thank you for not making me feel crazy." That line stayed with me for days, because that is what real kindness looks like sometimes. Not fixing, not rescuing, just staying, just listening, just letting someone feel seen. And when I walked home after that, I realized something important. I had not become cold. I had become clear. There is a difference. A very important difference. I no longer gave from panic. I gave from choice. I no longer said yes because I was afraid of losing people. I said yes when it was aligned with who I wanted to be. I no longer confused being emotionally available with being emotionally available to everyone. That was freedom. Real freedom. The kind that changes you from the inside out. But life, of course, had one more lesson for me. It always does. A few weeks later, I got an email from my old manager, the same man who had cut my position. The subject line was simple: opportunity to reconnect. I almost ignored it. Actually, I almost deleted it. But something told me to read it. He explained that his department had been growing again and that they were looking for someone experienced, organized, and dependable. Then he said they had thought of me. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the screen. A year earlier, I would have felt grateful immediately. I would have thought, "See, they remember me now." I would have rushed to say yes because I wanted the validation. But this time I read his words differently, because I knew what it meant to be useful to people when they wanted something. And I knew what it meant to ignore my own worth in the process. So I asked for details. The pay, the hours, the expectations, the flexibility, the role, the benefits, everything. And the more I learned, the clearer it became. It was not a bad offer, but it was not right for me. Not anymore. The old me would have accepted just to prove I could still be valuable. The new me understood that value does not mean returning to places that once discarded you. So, I wrote back politely and declined. My hands were steady when I clicked send, and when I finished, I sat back in my chair and let the silence wash over me. I had done it. I had chosen myself, not out of anger, not out of pride, out of wisdom, and that felt like a victory no one else needed to understand. That night, I called my mother. We had grown closer after our honest conversation, and I wanted to tell her about the offer. When she heard I turned it down, she was quiet for a second. Then she said, "I'm proud of you." I smiled, not because I needed the praise, but because I could hear how much she meant it. She asked me why I declined it, and I told her the truth. "I don't want to go back to being someone's backup plan," I said. My mother was silent again. Then she said, "That makes sense." It was such a small response, but it felt huge. Because sometimes the deepest healing is not a grand apology. It is being understood without having to fight for your own reality. We talked for nearly an hour after that. About her life, about mine, about the weather, about food, about nothing and everything. And while we spoke, I felt a strange sense of peace, not because every wound had disappeared, but because I no longer felt alone inside them. That was new too, and I treasured it. The older woman in the rain, the neighbor with the soup, the young woman on the bench, my mother's quiet understanding, even the rejection from my old manager. All of it fit together. All of it was teaching me the same lesson in different ways. Kindness should not cost you your identity. Help should not erase your boundaries. Love should not require self-erasure. And the people who genuinely care about you will not punish you for finally caring about yourself. That was the life lesson hiding inside my pain. And once I saw it, I could never go back. One Sunday morning, I made tea and sat by my window as the sun came through the glass. The city looked calm from where I was sitting. Cars moving slowly, people walking dogs, someone laughing on the street below. Life happening all around me. And I thought about how much had changed. A year ago, I was exhausted, broke, and emotionally stripped bare. Now I was still imperfect, still working, still healing, still learning. But I was no longer living like a person on fire for everybody else. I was building a life that could hold me. And that, I realized, was enough. Not perfect, not flashy, not dramatic, just enough. And after everything I had been through, enough felt like a miracle. I whispered to myself, I am enough. Then I said it again, louder this time. I am enough. And for the first time, I believed it. So this is where my story stands now. Not at the end. Because life keeps going. People still need help. Days still get hard. Old feelings still appear sometimes. But I know who I am now. I know that I can care deeply without abandoning myself. I know that I can love people without carrying them. I know that I can be generous without being drained. I know that I am allowed to be selective with my energy, my time, my money, and my heart. And I know that the people who are meant for me will not only admire my kindness, they will respect my limits. That is what I learned when life finally made me stop giving everything away. It was not punishment. It was awakening. It was the painful gift of seeing my own worth clearly. So if you have ever felt like the one who gives and gives and gives until there is nothing left, let me say this to you as gently as I can. Your softness is not a weakness. Your kindness is not a flaw. But your life is not meant to be a donation to everyone around you. You are allowed to keep something for yourself. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to become harder to use and easier to love. And if the people around you only liked the version of you that was endlessly available, then what they loved was not you. It was access. I learned that the hard way, but I learned it, and it saved me. My name is Claire. And that was the moment I finally understood something I had spent years avoiding. You do not become strong by becoming harder to hurt. You become strong by learning what deserves access to you. That sounds simple now. It did not feel simple when I was living it. Because for so long, I had believed the best version of myself was the one that could absorb everything. Other people's pain, other people's stress, other people's emergencies, other people's silence. I thought that made me noble. I thought that made me lovable. But all it really did was teach people that my limits were optional. And once you let the world believe that, it becomes very difficult to take your life back. So I had to keep practicing, over and over, Even after all the progress, there were still moments when I almost slipped back into old habits. A friend would call in tears, and I would feel that old urge to fix everything. A relative would hint at financial trouble, and I would feel guilty for not offering help immediately. Someone would call me selfish in a joking way after I said no, and I would feel that familiar burn of shame rise in my chest. But this time, I did not let the shame steer the car. I sat with it, I breathed through it, and I let it pass. Because guilt is not always a sign that you are doing something wrong. Sometimes guilt is just the sound of an old identity dying. And mine had to die. The girl who said yes to everyone had to go. The woman who begged to be needed had to go. The version of me that confused self-abandonment with love had to go. Not because she was bad, because she was exhausted. And she deserved to rest. One of the biggest tests came from someone I never expected. My father. We had always been polite with each other, but not especially close. He was not cruel. He was just distant in the way some parents are when they do not know how to show care without stumbling over it. He called me one evening out of the blue. "Your mother told me you've been doing well," he said. "Yeah," I replied, a little cautious. There was a pause. Then he said, "I'm proud of you." I looked out my window at the city lights and did not know what to say, because those 3 words carried more weight than he probably realized. I thanked him quietly. Then, after a moment, he said something else. "I heard you've been setting boundaries." I almost laughed, but not because it was funny, because somehow even that had reached him. "Yes," I said. Another pause. Then he said, "Good. I think you needed that." His voice was calm, but there was something in it that sounded almost regretful. I leaned back in my chair. "Why do you say that?" I asked. He hesitated, and then I went completely still, because there it was. The sentence I had waited most of my life to hear. Not from a stranger, not from a friend, from my father.